People who discovered their partner's biggest lie. What was it? I spent 3 years thinking I was infertile and considering expensive treatments, only to find out my husband secretly got a vasectomy before we even started trying. I met husband Angelo 3 years ago at one of those insufferable networking events where everyone pretends craft beer makes small talk less painful. He was different, though. While other guys were doing that thing where they talk about their startup ideas with the intensity of evangelical preachers, Angelo was making jokes about how his job in software engineering was teaching computers to hate humans more efficiently. Red flag number 1. In hindsight, I found his cynicism charming instead of concerning. But hey, I was 26 and thought emotional unavailability was the same thing as mysterious depth. We've all been there. The man was a goddamn fairy tale prince during our first year together. He'd bring me coffee in bed, leave little notes in my lunch bag. He'd get this dreamy look whenever kids ran by us at the park. "Look at that little guy," he'd say, watching some toddler have a complete meltdown over a dropped ice cream. "I can't wait until we have our own tiny dictator." Our own tiny dictator. I should have gotten that embroidered on a pillow, considering how much emotional real estate those 4 words occupied in my brain. Angelo proposed after 18 months with a ring that suggested he'd been listening during all those times I pointed out jewelry I liked. I was still living in the fantasy where Angelo was my person, my teammate, the father of my hypothetical children who already had names picked out. Elaine Charlotte for a girl, James Angelo for a boy. We'd narrowed down our favorite neighborhoods for when we get a house with a proper yard for the kids. The wedding was everything I wanted. Small, intimate, and featuring a groom who cried actual tears during his vows. He promised to build a family with me that would make us both proud. I have it on video. I should probably submit it to some kind of performance art festival because the man deserves an Oscar for that level of method acting. Our first year of marriage was domestic bliss with a capital B. We painted the spare bedroom a cheerful yellow because it was gender neutral for the nursery. Angelo installed shelves in there for when we have books to read at bedtime. I bought a rocking chair at an estate sale because it was perfect for feeding time. We were playing house with imaginary children, and I thought we were the luckiest couple alive. The conversations about starting to try began around our first anniversary. I was ready immediately. Had been ready since about month 6 of dating, if I'm being honest. But Angelo suggested we practice for a few more months. "Let's make sure we've got the technique down," he said. "Plus, I want to enjoy having you all to myself for just a little longer." Romantic, right? Wrong. Manipulative as hell, but I didn't speak fluent sociopath yet. There were signs. Angelo never seemed particularly interested in the logistics of pregnancy. Didn't ask about my cycle, didn't suggest I start taking prenatal vitamins, didn't do any of that research-obsessed preparation that most men do when they're actually planning to reproduce. But I chalked it up to different communication styles. I was the planner, he was the go-with-the-flow type. Classic compatibility, right? When we finally started trying after our second anniversary, Angelo maintained this zen-like calm that I initially found reassuring. Month 1, negative test. Month 2, negative test. Month 3, still nothing. I was tracking everything while Angelo just existed. No stress, no urgency, no suggestions about timing or positions or any of the shit guys usually get weird about when they're trying to procreate. "These things take time, babe," he'd say, rubbing my shoulders while I stared at another negative pregnancy test. "We're still young. No rush. No rush." Famous last words from a man who'd already made sure there would never be any destination to rush toward, but I didn't know that yet. I just thought I'd married the most patient, supportive man alive. God, I was an idiot. 6 months of enthusiastic baby-making with absolutely nothing to show for it except really good muscle memory and a growing collection of negative pregnancy tests that I kept in a shoebox like some kind of fertility failure scrapbook. Angelo remained mysteriously zen throughout this entire process, which I initially interpreted as supportive husband energy rather than guy who knows exactly why this isn't working. "Maybe we should get you checked out," he suggested one morning while I was calculating my luteal phase for the 100th time. You know, just to make sure everything's working properly. Everything's working properly. Like I was a broken appliance he was troubleshooting rather than his wife who was slowly losing her mind over their apparent inability to reproduce. But here's the thing. Angelo framed it perfectly. "Women's bodies are more complex," he said. "More things can go wrong." It made total sense that I should be the one getting prodded and poked and violated by medical instruments while he sat in waiting rooms reading Sports Illustrated. So off I went to Dr. Rachel Galvin, reproductive endocrinologist and unwitting accomplice in my husband's elaborate psychological experiment. The fertility testing process is basically medical hazing designed to break your spirit before they even try to fix your ovaries. Blood draws every other day to track hormone levels. Ultrasounds where they shove a wand up your business to count your eggs like some kind of reproductive census. Angelo drove me to every appointment like the world's most supportive husband. Held my hand in waiting rooms. Brought me ice cream after the particularly uncomfortable procedures. Meanwhile, I was losing my absolute mind. Every test came back normal. Perfect even. Dr. Galvin kept using words like excellent ovarian reserve and beautiful uterine lining like she was appraising real estate instead of my reproductive organs, which somehow made everything worse. There's something uniquely devastating about being told your body is perfect when it's clearly not doing the one thing bodies are biologically designed to do. I started researching obscure fertility conditions with the dedication of someone writing their doctoral dissertation on reproductive failure. I bought prenatal vitamins in bulk, started eating organic everything, cut out caffeine, alcohol, and anything that might be remotely toxic to a hypothetical fetus. Angelo watched all of this with the detached interest of someone observing a fascinating social experiment. He'd make supportive noises when I'd show him my temperature charts or explain my latest supplement regimen, but there was something almost clinical about his responses. "You're really dedicated to this," he'd say. Like dedication to having his children was some quirky hobby I'd picked up, rather than a fundamental desire to build our family. He never suggested he get tested. Not once. When I brought it up, because Dr. Galvin had mentioned that male factor infertility accounted for like 40% of cases, Angelo would deflect with jokes about his masculinity or complaints about being too busy at work to deal with doctor appointments. "I don't think I could handle having some doctor tell me my swimmers aren't up to par," he'd laugh. "My ego's too fragile for that kind of rejection." I started questioning everything about my body, my health, my fundamental worth as a woman. I'd see pregnant women at the grocery store and feel this toxic combination of rage and self-pity that made me hate myself for being such a bitter person. My sister Megan started suggesting we were trying too hard, that stress might be affecting my fertility. "Maybe you guys should just relax and let it happen naturally," she'd say, unknowingly echoing every piece of useless advice that's ever been given to women struggling to conceive. But Angelo loved that theory. Stress was the perfect explanation that put the responsibility squarely on my shoulders while requiring absolutely nothing from him except continued performance of supportive husband theater. 18 months into trying, Dr. Galvin suggested we escalate to IUI treatments. For those lucky enough to be unfamiliar with fertility acronyms, that's intrauterine insemination, basically turkey basting sperm directly into your uterus. "Sometimes the sperm just need a little help getting to the right place, Dr. Galvin explained with the kind of gentle optimism that costs $400 per appointment. The sperm needed help getting to the right place. If only I'd known the real problem was that the sperm were never invited to the party in the first place. The IUI process is fertility treatment's greatest hits of medical indignity. Daily hormone injections that turn you into an emotional pinball machine, monitoring appointments where they count your eggs like you're a prize hen, and then the procedure itself, which involves your husband providing a sample in a cup while you lie there with your legs in stirrups, pretending this is totally normal foreplay. Angelo would drive me to my 7 a.m. monitoring appointments without complaint, hold my hand during the procedures, make jokes to lighten the mood when I was crying over another negative pregnancy test. "Maybe next month," he'd say, stroking my hair while I sobbed into his shoulder. "We just have to keep trying. Keep trying." The man deserved a fucking Emmy for that performance. 3 rounds of IUI, 3 failures, $8,000 in medical bills that our insurance considered elective, and my sister Megan even made the fatal error of suggesting couples counseling. "Maybe you guys should talk to someone about the stress," she said during one of our weekly coffee dates where I'd update her on my latest reproductive failures. "This whole process is really hard on relationships." I thought it was a reasonable suggestion. Angelo had been working late more often, seemed distracted during dinner conversations, and had started deflecting whenever I brought up next steps in our fertility journey. When I mentioned Megan's suggestion to Angelo that night, his reaction was illuminating. "Couples counseling?" He looked up from his laptop like I'd suggested we join a cult. "Why would we need counseling? Just to talk through some of the stress around—" "What stress?" "I'm not stressed." The man whose wife had spent the last year and a half slowly losing her mind over their inability to reproduce wasn't stressed. "Well, I'm stressed," I said. "Then maybe you should see someone. Individually. Individual therapy for my individual problem with our collective reproductive failure." That fight was our first real crack in the perfect husband facade. Angelo got defensive, almost angry, about the suggestion that our relationship might need professional support. He accused Megan of interfering and me of looking for problems where none existed. "We're fine, Elaine. The only problem is that you're letting your sister get in your head about our marriage." Our marriage was fine. It was my head that was the problem. Classic gaslighting 101, but I didn't recognize it yet because I was too busy questioning my own sanity. The medical records incident happened 2 weeks later, purely by accident. I was organizing our bills for tax purposes, because apparently even reproductive failure generates paperwork, when I saw charges on Angelo's insurance statements that I didn't recognize. Urology appointments, multiple visits to Dr. Andrew Conklin, urologist, appointments that happened during work hours when Angelo claimed to be in back-to-back meetings. "Hey," I called from the kitchen, holding the insurance statement like evidence in a murder trial. "When did you see a urologist?" The silence from the living room was deafening. "Angelo? Oh, that." He appeared in the doorway with the casual demeanor of someone discussing the weather. "Just routine stuff. Work physical required it." But I believed him, because I was still operating under the assumption that my husband wasn't a sociopathic liar. Update. You know that moment in horror movies where the protagonist finally realizes the killer has been living in their house the whole time? That dawning horror when everything clicks into place and you understand that your entire reality has been a carefully constructed lie? Yeah, that happened to me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sitting in a Target parking lot, eating a sad desk salad and contemplating whether I should try acupuncture or just accept that my uterus was apparently decorative. I'd been staring at those insurance statements for 3 days, and Angelo's explanation about routine work physical stuff was sitting in my brain like a splinter. Not because I suspected anything, God, I was still so fucking naive, but because the timing seemed weird. Multiple urology appointments during our fertility struggles, and he'd never mentioned them, so I did what any rational wife would do. I called Dr. Conklin's office to ask if Angelo needed a follow-up appointment scheduled, because I'm thoughtful like that, always managing everyone else's healthcare like some kind of medical secretary for my own family. Hi, I said to the receptionist, using my brightest, helpful wife voice. I'm calling to check if my husband Angelo Montana needs any follow-up appointments scheduled. He's been so busy with work and I want to make sure he doesn't miss anything important. Oh, Mrs. Montana, let me check his file. Papers shuffling. Yes, he's actually due for his annual post-vasectomy follow-up. Would you like to schedule that now? Post-vasectomy follow-up. I sat there in my Honda Civic, holding my phone, while my entire world disintegrated into tiny pieces around me. The salad fell off my lap. My brain started making this weird static noise. Mrs. Montana, are you still there? I'm sorry, I managed to croak out. Did you say post-vasectomy? Yes, doctor. Conklin likes to see patients annually after the procedure to make sure everything is still working properly. Should I check his availability for next week? Everything is still working properly. His goddamn vasectomy was working perfectly. That was the entire fucking problem. I hung up without scheduling the appointment because what do you even say to that? Actually, my husband has been lying to me about having a vasectomy while I've been pumping myself full of hormones and spending our life savings on fertility treatments, so maybe let's hold off on that follow-up. I drove home in a fugue state, running through every conversation we'd ever had about kids, every appointment where he'd held my hand while doctors discussed my unexplained infertility, every night I'd cried about my broken body while he rubbed my back and told me to be patient. He'd known, the entire time. He'd known. Angelo was in his home office when I walked through the front door, typing away on his laptop like he hadn't just been exposed as a world-class sociopath. I stood in the doorway for a full minute, watching him work, trying to reconcile this normal-looking man with the monster who'd been systematically gaslighting me for 2 years. We need to talk, I said. He looked up with that same mild, concerned expression he'd perfected over months of fertility appointments. What's wrong, babe? You look upset. What's wrong? Jesus Christ, the audacity. When did you get a vasectomy, Angelo? I watched his face go through about 12 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, panic, calculation, then finally, resignation. How did you? When? He closed his laptop slowly, like he was buying time to construct his next lie. Elaine, I can explain. When? 6 months after we started dating. 6 months. We'd been together for 6 months when he decided to permanently eliminate any possibility of us having children together. While I was falling in love with him, he was making surgical decisions that would ensure I'd never have his kids. While I was imagining our future family, he was taking medical steps to guarantee it would never exist. You got a vasectomy 6 months into our relationship and then spent the next 3 years watching me torture myself over fertility treatments. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like what, Angelo? It wasn't like you deliberately deceived me. It wasn't like you let me spend 18 months thinking my body was broken. It wasn't like you sat in doctors' offices while they discussed my unexplained infertility and said nothing. He stood up, hands raised like I was a wild animal he needed to calm down. Which, fair point, I was about to go completely feral. I was going to tell you, he said. I just didn't know how. You were going to tell me. When? After I'd spent our retirement savings on IVF? After I'd had a nervous breakdown from thinking I was defective? When exactly was the right moment in your timeline? I thought maybe I'd change my mind about kids. So you got a vasectomy? I thought if I met the right person, I could get it reversed. But you never did. The timing never seemed right. The timing never seemed right to mention that you'd had surgery to prevent the thing we've been trying to do for 2 years. Angelo ran his hands through his hair, finally dropping the confused husband act. I know how this looks. How this looks. How this looks. I was screaming now, which probably alarmed the neighbors, but fuck the neighbors. This looks like fraud, Angelo. This looks like you married me under false pretenses. This looks like you've been lying to my face for our entire relationship. I do love you. You don't lie to people you love for 3 years. I was trying to protect you. From what? From the truth? From having a choice in whether I wanted to be with someone who never intended to have children with me? That's when he said the thing that made me realize I wasn't just married to a liar. I was married to someone fundamentally broken. I thought if we couldn't have kids, you'd focus more on us. On our relationship. Our relationship. The one built entirely on deception. The one where he'd watched me suffer and blame myself while he knew exactly why we couldn't conceive. That relationship. You thought watching me go through fertility treatments would make me focus more on you? I thought eventually you'd realize we didn't need kids to be happy. By letting me think I was infertile, I was going to suggest adoption. When, Angelo? After how many years of letting me think my body was broken? after how much money spent on useless treatments. He went quiet then, because we both knew the answer. He was never going to tell me. He was going to let me spend years, maybe decades, thinking I was the problem. He would have let me go through IVF, multiple miscarriages from fertility drugs, surgical procedures, whatever it took to maintain his lie. I called my sister from the car because I couldn't be in that house with him for another second. Megan? I need you to come over and bring wine. A lot of wine. What happened? Angelo got a vasectomy 3 years ago and has been letting me think I'm infertile while I spent $23,000 on fertility treatments. Silence. Then, I'm leaving work now. Don't do anything that would require bail money before I get there. Too late for that advice, honestly. I was already mentally planning Angelo's demise in ways that would definitely require legal representation. Megan arrived with a bottle of vodka and a look that suggested she was ready to help me hide a body. We sat on my couch, the couch where Angelo and I had planned our imaginary children's futures, and I told her everything. I'm going to kill him, she said when I finished. Like literally murder him. Get in line. No, Elaine, I'm serious. What he did is psychotic. That's when it hit me. The full scope of what Angelo had done wasn't just lying about the vasectomy. He'd watched me blame myself, hate my body, question my worth as a woman, all while knowing he was the reason we couldn't conceive. He'd turned my desire to have his children into a weapon against my sanity. $23,000, I said to Megan. $23,000 in medical bills for treatments that could never work. Can you sue him? I don't know. Can you sue your husband for being a sociopath? Megan pulled out her phone. We're going to find out. That night, I made Angelo sleep in the guest room, the room we'd painted yellow for our future nursery. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the fact that my entire marriage was a lie. Not just the vasectomy, everything. Every conversation about our future, every plan we'd made, every moment of intimacy we'd shared had been tainted by his deception. The man I'd fallen in love with didn't exist. He'd been a character Angelo played, a role he'd performed to perfection for 3 years. I'd married a stranger. Worse, I'd married a stranger who was willing to let me believe I was fundamentally broken, rather than admit he'd never intended to give me what I wanted most. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. Turns out divorce lawyers don't work for free, which is really inconvenient when you've already blown your life savings on fertility treatments that were doomed from the start. But Jennifer Britt, Esquire, took one look at my case and her eyes lit up like she'd just found a $20 bill in an old coat pocket. This is fraud, she said, flipping through my medical bills with the enthusiasm of someone who bills $300 an hour. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, potentially even medical malpractice by proxy. How much did you spend on treatments? Jennifer asked. $23,000, plus the emotional therapy I'll need for the rest of my life, but I guess that's harder to quantify. Actually, it's not. We can absolutely quantify ongoing psychological damage. I love lawyers. They're like therapists, except they cost more and occasionally get you money instead of just validating your feelings. The first thing Jennifer did was send Angelo a letter demanding he cease all contact with me except through legal counsel. The second thing she did was freeze our joint accounts. Angelo's response was predictable. He showed up at my sister's house at 11 p.m. that same night, drunk and sentimental, ready to deliver what I can only describe as the worst apology tour in human history. Elaine, please, he slurred through Megan's front door. I can get the vasectomy reversed. We can still have kids. We can still have kids. After 3 years of lying, he thought the solution was more medical procedures. Megan opened the door just wide enough to stick her head out. Angelo, if you don't get off my property in the next 30 seconds, I'm calling the police. I love her, he said, swaying slightly. I made a mistake. You made a lot of mistakes, Megan replied. I can fix this. The only thing you can fix is your relationship with honesty, and frankly, I don't think you're equipped for that level of self-improvement. God, I love my sister. She's like a truth-telling machine with zero patience for bullshit. Jennifer subpoenaed Angelo's medical records, which revealed the full timeline of his deception. The vasectomy had been scheduled 2 weeks before he first told me he loved me. 2 weeks. He'd already decided he never wanted children with me before he even said the words, I love you. The medical records also showed that Angelo had called Dr. Conklin's office 3 times during my fertility treatments, asking about vasectomy reversal procedures and success rates. He'd been researching his options the entire time I was injecting hormones into my stomach, not to actually get the reversal, mind you, just to know what his theoretical options were if his deception ever got exposed. Jennifer was practically vibrating with excitement when she showed me these records. He was planning his defense strategy while you were going through IUI, she said. This shows premeditation, calculated cruelty. I should get that embroidered on a pillow right next to our own tiny dictator. Jennifer contacted Dr. Galvin's office for my complete medical file. Turns out Angelo had specifically requested that I not be given any information about male factor infertility during my appointments. He'd asked Dr. Galvin to focus exclusively on female causes when discussing our case. Dr. Galvin, to her credit, was horrified when she learned about Angelo's vasectomy. Mrs. Montana, if I had known about your husband's surgical history, I never would have recommended the treatments you underwent, she said during her deposition. The procedures you endured were unnecessary and potentially harmful given the circumstances. Unnecessary and potentially harmful. That's going to look great on the medical malpractice settlement paperwork. But Angelo wasn't going down without a fight. Oh no, he hired his own lawyer, David Kellner, a man who apparently specialized in defending pieces of shit, and mounted what I can only describe as the world's most offensive legal strategy. Angelo's defense was that I'd been obsessed with having children to an unhealthy degree, and that his deception had been a form of protective intervention to save our marriage from my reproductive fixation. Kellner argued that Angelo had been trying to protect me from the disappointment of infertility by letting me think I was infertile. But I won. Eventually, I won. The case settled out of court for $127,000, enough to cover my medical expenses, legal fees, and what Jennifer called damages for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Not enough to undo 3 years of psychological torture, but enough to pay for a really good therapist and a vacation somewhere that doesn't allow husbands. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. I got the house because apparently judges don't look kindly on men who orchestrate elaborate fertility fraud schemes. Angelo got to keep his precious vasectomy and a legal requirement to disclose his surgical history to any future romantic partners. The aftermath was educational in ways I hadn't expected. People's reactions fell into 2 categories: complete horror or weird victim blaming. The horror camp was led by my family and real friends, who couldn't understand how someone could be that deliberately cruel to a person they claimed to love. The victim blaming camp was smaller, but more vocal. These were people who suggested that I should have known something was wrong, or that I'd been naive to trust my husband's word about wanting children. My favorite response came from Angelo's mother, Carol, who called me 3 weeks after the settlement to inform me that I was destroying her son's life over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding. 3 years of systematic deception was a misunderstanding. Carol, I said, your son got a vasectomy and then let me spend $23,000 on fertility treatments. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. He was just scared. Scared of what? Honesty? Basic human decency? You're being very dramatic about this. I'm being dramatic? Your son literally watched me inject hormones into my stomach while knowing I could never get pregnant from him. If anything, I'm being understated. Carol hung up on me, which was probably for the best. I wasn't in the mood to explain why lying about vasectomies is considered problematic behavior in most civilized societies. 6 months post-divorce, I'm living alone in our old house, sleeping better than I have in years. I kept the yellow nursery as a reminder, not of what I lost, but of what I escaped. Every time I walk past that room, I remember that I'm no longer married to someone who could watch me suffer and call it love. I'm back in therapy. But this time, it's the good kind where you process trauma instead of creating it. I'm learning that my desire for children wasn't obsessive or unhealthy. It was normal. What was unhealthy was staying married to someone who viewed my reproductive trauma as acceptable collateral damage for his own comfort. I'm also learning that I'm not broken. My body works fine. My heart works fine. My judgment in men, well, that needs some work, but we're getting there. Angelo, last I heard, was dating someone new, a 24-year-old grad student who probably has no idea what she's signing up for. I briefly considered reaching out to warn her, then decided that some lessons can only be learned firsthand. Plus, I'm not responsible for protecting other women from my ex-husband's sociopathic tendencies. That's what background checks and Google searches are for. The house feels different now, lighter, like someone removed a heavy blanket I hadn't realized was suffocating me. I'm repainting the spare room, bright blue because I like blue, and I don't have to ask anyone's permission anymore. I might still want children someday. I might not. The difference is that now it's my choice to make, with full information and without anyone orchestrating my reproductive decisions from the shadows. And if I do decide to have children, they'll be with someone who doesn't view honesty as optional and my happiness as negotiable. Someone who understands that love isn't about protecting people from difficult truths. It's about trusting them to handle those truths with you. The bar is so low it's practically underground, but hey, at least now I know where it is. Edit. For everyone asking, yes, I reported Angelo to the medical board for his interference with my treatment. Dr. Galvin is also pursuing her own complaint about patient manipulation. Edit 2. And yes, before anyone asks, I got tested for STDs after the divorce. Because if someone can lie about a vasectomy for 3 years, they can lie about other things too. Clean bill of health, thankfully, but the trust issues are probably permanent. Too long. Didn't read. Husband got secret vasectomy, watched me spend $23,000 on fertility treatments while thinking I was broken. Turned out he was the broken one all along. Divorce cost him $127,000 and his reputation. Sometimes karma comes with legal fees attached, and honestly, that's the best kind of karma there is.